Table, you can see some publications by Bersay. Some are free of charge. It's our research report. You can pick up a copy, as well as our annual report. But there's also a book called Making Democracy Work. That is an abridged version of all the Bersay report into one simple, readable book. So that is actually for sale at 50 ringgit. Please support us. Pick up a copy before you leave the hall. So this is the final sessions of the roundtable. Thank you everyone staying put until the last sessions. And this is actually one of the most, I think, vibrant and diverse participations, because we have involved civil society and also the media. These sessions, we will explore the role of civil society in organizing for change and the significance of media as a platform and agent for democracy. So we have invited diverse speakers from all experts in their own fields and work, and we will discuss advocacy, lobbying in this new political environment. Can I have everybody's attention, please? And be seated. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So for these sessions, I would like to invite Ms. Nirmala Devi Winkita, who is the Secretary General of Global Bersay, to moderate these sessions. Nirmala is the Secretary General of Global Bersay. She worked on electoral reform and engaged with Malaysia members of Parlimen and also Malaysian civil society to advocate for the rights of Malaysians diaspora. Please welcome Nirmala, who will introduce the panel and also the discussions this afternoon.
Thank you, Chow Ying, for that wonderful introduction. Very kind of you. Thank you to all of you for coming back here. I can imagine after that delicious lunch, the thought of a nice afternoon nap is there, but that's not going to happen when you meet our speakers today. So without wasting any time, I would like to invite Mr. Marlon Nambrado from the Philippines. Mr. Marlon is the co-founder and one of the heads of the non-profit Out-of-the-Box Media Literacy Initiative, specializing in critical media literacy and producing alternative narratives and new discourses in media through films. Thank you. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Tharma Pillai, a well-known personality in Malaysia. Is the co-founder and advocacy director of Undi 18, a youth movement that successfully advocated for lowering the voting age in Malaysia from 21 to 18 years old. I would like to also invite a well-known face in Malaysia, Melissa Idris, an anchor at Astro AWANI News Network, where she hosts the flagship English language talk show, Consider This and the Future is Female. Yeah, well known. And we also have Radzi Razak, who is the spokesperson of the Gerakan Media Merdeka Freedom Media Movement, very aptly known as GERAM, a well-seasoned journalist advocating media freedom. He is also experienced in public relations, volunteerism, and activism. And of course, last and never the least, Ira Azhari, who is the Senior Manager of the Democracy and Governance Unit in the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs Ideas. She's an expert on Malaysian politics, international relations, economics, and governance. The list goes on, but I have to stop because we don't have so much time, yeah? So, I think you all know why we are here. We are here to discuss the role of the civil society and the media, how we can be a catalyst to change that we are looking for. So without wasting any time, I would like to invite Mr. Marlon Nambrado to come and share his presentation, to share a story from Philippines where we can take some lessons from. Please, thank you.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Nirmala, for the introduction. Thanks as well to CAF, to Bersi, Global Bersi, the Parliament of Malaysia for making all of these possible. So I am Marlon. I am an educator, an activist, and an NGO worker from the Philippines. I co-founded an educational nonprofit with my friends back in 2014. We call it OOTB, or Out of the Box. Sorry, I have to... Okay, I think it's not yet on. There you go. Since our establishment, we've trained thousands of Filipinos through our resources, workshops, and campaigns on countering disinformation, upholding press freedom and digital rights, and leveraging media for civic good. And I'm very glad, and I believe everyone feels the same, that we've finally arrived at the 5th and final session of this wonderful 2-day roundtable on deepening democracy here in Malaysia. While there's reasonably very huge interest in discussing the operations of the Parliament in this program, we must not forget that we cannot talk about democracy and democratization without discussing civil society, the media, and the youth. One can even argue that the mark of a truly functioning democracy cannot be found within the halls of the government, but in the streets or in the everyday workings of its citizens. I'm sure all of us in this room can agree that trying to make democracy work is a truly challenging experience, a truly challenging enterprise, regardless if you are a politician, a civil servant, an NGO worker, a student, what have you. But this is especially truer when you have a fragmented society, which is one of the many ways to describe my beloved country, the Philippines. Social fragmentation due to affective polarization was on full display in the last national elections in the Philippines, which, by the way, happened almost exactly a year ago, May 9, 2022. In their study of disinformation and influence operations during the 2022 elections, Professor Jonathan Ong and his team spoke of the concept of parallel public spheres, not singular, but dual parallel spheres. These are, and I quote, highly and unequally radicalized information ecosystems that demonstrate immense difference in terms of both issue positions and issue perceptions. Basically, civic spaces, both online and offline in the Philippine society, have become radically divided. People cannot bear listening to views opposite theirs. And for this, the central role of social media platforms cannot be denied. Disinformation, propaganda, hate speech, racial, gendered, class-based, partisan hate speech. So one of the things that we did last year prior to the elections was this program called Share Mo Lang Voters Forum. Instead of the typical unilateral voters education programming, Share Mo Lang was designed to encourage young people to step out of their echo chambers and form a safe space where they respectfully engage with opposing views. If I am to borrow one of Marco's points earlier in the earlier session, trust. Trust is key if democracy is to work. Problem is, social trust levels is probably at its lowest in Philippine society today. Merely bringing people with opposing views together in one room is already a great challenge. So doing advocacy work outside of echo chambers is necessary, if not an urgent agenda for all. 1 year forward, we're happy to see more and more organizations today that are taking this approach, to move beyond mere fact-checking trainings, to conduct grassroots dialogues in communities with the goal of generating conversations on diverse issues. This is just one of the many important lessons we have realized while working with different stakeholders of civil society in the networks and coalitions that Out of the Box is part of. One of which is called Facts First PH. This is a multi-sectoral initiative that was convened by Rappler, composed of news media, NGOs, activists, academics, and legal institutions. Forming Facts First proved to be a very crucial move in our context, in a time when activists and dissenters were actively being cornered and harassed by state forces. Amidst shrinking civic spaces that was made worse by years of COVID-19 lockdowns, NGOs, activists, and likewise the independent media really needed to come together. This in spite of ideological differences, which are very palpable in many instances, political economic motives, which obviously differ for NGOs and private institutions, and other norms and traditions. You will see in this visual the number of organizations under Facts First PH, which continue to grow until today. The same thing can be said about the Initiative for Media Freedom, or IMF, a consortium of civil society orgs, which Out of the Box is also part of. The mission vision of IMF draws the pathways from press freedom and free speech to the enhancement of democratic governance. Some key projects under IMF include the establishment of citizen media councils in different provinces in the Philippines, which is crucial in the discussion of the improvement of the work of local media. It also includes the provision of legal support for journalists who are targeted by so-called lawfare, or the weaponization of laws against civil society, and various civic-oriented initiatives by and for the youth. With our lessons learned in recent past, I am confident that Philippine civil society and media can persist, like it always does. But to my last point, doing what we have always done, or doing things the same way we've been doing them for a very long time, might not be the right way to move forward. I think many, if not most, CSOs and even the legacy media in the Philippines have been so used to a reactive instead of a more proactive approach. I would like to bring up again YB Kelvin Yee's point earlier on the need to evolve politicians' perceptions and capacities as policymakers or legislators instead of mere dishing out money to their constituents. Sadly, many CSOs and even legacy media in my country mirror these faulty political culture. For example, news media heavily frame politicians as celebrities, or political conflicts center on spectacle and not on rational debates on policies and so on. CSOs, on the other hand, set aside research and policy and lobbying efforts and prioritize outreach and charity that directly benefits the grassroots. This might be due to the sheer distrust in the legislative system or the legislative processes, or it can also be due to poor levels of civic education. Unsurprisingly, this breeds self-righteousness as well as eternal frustration for many in the civil society and media sector. We cannot continue this path if we are to take our role seriously in democratization. One aspiration and prospect that I have for civil society and media is for us to constantly introspect, look at and talk amongst ourselves, collaborate, learn, unlearn, and relearn, so we can improve our processes and practices, especially amidst the rapid transformations happening in our society today. NGO, media, and other stakeholder coalitions are most crucial for this. And I have this to say, and I have to say, that young people's greatest contribution to democratization is our imagination, our unique power to dream and to actuate alternative pathways, this strong urge to question and reject ways that we have been doing before that are not really working. There's this one concept that I would like to share with you because I find it very important to the work of civil society in my country, and maybe possibly relevant here in Malaysia as well. This is Adele Webb's notion of democratic ambivalence. Tracing it to our colonial history under the Americans, Adele Webb interrogates the Filipino middle class's appreciation for democracy, which she describes as ambivalent, coexistently desiring for equality and freedom on the one hand, and leaning towards hierarchy and restraint on the other. Integrating interrogative ideas like democratic ambivalence in the work of civil society means having greater efforts to better understand ourselves, our roles, and it means greater empathy and more inclusive solidarity among the many stakeholders of democracy. I remember during the welcome dinner 2 nights ago, when Professor Wong preached that we need politics and democracy to work for us, the people, I believe he partly meant that we need to fully understand and come into terms with the cultural, historical, social factors that color our democratic life in our own respective countries. For example, here are a few key points from a book about political parties and select Asian countries that was published only this May, which, by the way, is open source by Routledge, so you might want to download and read it yourself. But in this slide, you will see some key barriers to democratization that exist in many Asian democracies: clientelism, personalism, and the partial commitment of parties to democracy, which manifests both internally and externally. For civil society and government to work, we obviously cannot let these barriers assume normalcy in our democratic cultures. And so, to my point earlier, we must become more proactive, and it follows we must innovate and we must always dare. So a few minutes ago, before our start of the session, I realized I wasn't able to include in my slides that in the Philippines, lobbying efforts by youth-based civil society organizations figure to be more impactful in local government units within cities, municipalities, and barangays. I think this is the case because concerns related to the youth are heard and given more space in local councils. And of course, the sheer bureaucracy that is involved in national government processes is just discouraging many young people to get involved in politics. So for now, I will end here, since I am equally eager to hear from my fellow panelists about their thoughts and experiences of Malaysian civil society, media, and the youth. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Marlon. I'm just going to steal the microphone so we don't have to share the other two. Thank you very much for that interesting presentation. And I think we, the panels, and also everyone here can actually relate and find a lot of parallels to what's happening in Malaysia now. I think the word polarization has been very dominant the last 2 days. It has been spoken by every experts all over the world, local speakers. So in Malaysia, this would be a question for you, Ira, just to get things going. How can we mobilize the diversified society like Malaysia, and how can we get our political parties or parliamentary to have other narratives than just race and religion when it comes to mobilization of the society in Malaysia?
Thanks, Nirmala, for kicking off the session by asking me the hardest question. But before that, thank you to you for the really enlightening presentation. I will be downloading the book right after this, and hopefully be able to read it. And yes, I also see many parallels with what is happening in Malaysia and also around the world. So on your question, I've been obviously also giving this a lot of thought, especially after GE15 and how everyone's been talking about this tsunami or wave, the so-called green tsunami that's happened. And I think there are several ways to unpack this. Firstly, I think in our national discourse, sometimes this conversation about polarization and racism comes up, is usually triggered by something, and we always have scapegoats when this happens. So one of the common scapegoats is vernacular schools, right? So we always blame vernacular schools for, oh, why is it that we have a single stream of education for a certain race, and then we blame this for sowing mistrust amongst our citizens from a young age. And that is true to some extent, but I would love it if we can go beyond this kind of scapegoating. Firstly, if you look at the issue of education, I mean, I don't think vernacular schools is solely to blame. I think our education system as a whole is pretty much segregated. It's not just vernacular schools, but other schools are also solely focused on one race. It's not just vernacular schools. And secondly, I think we do not have the right platforms and spaces to talk about our differences as a people. We always talk about the really pretty nice things, our similarities. During festive seasons, we talk about how we go to open houses and we makan and we love each other's cuisines, and all of that is true and that's great. But I think the impact of panels before this have talked about one-party rule and how that reinforces certain power structures, right? So, and I think because of multiple factors, but we do not have these kind of spaces and platforms to talk about our differences, and why is it that we mistrust each other, and why do we have certain stereotypes of people of different races? And thirdly, I think has proved to be really harmful is the this inextricable link between religion and also race, particularly Islam and the Malay-Muslim link, right? So I think we have, over the 6 decades plus of our existence, we are just unable to separate these two, and this discussion has infiltrated our institutions. So state-level institutions that are supposed to be, at least if not neutral, indifferent towards religion. I believe that the state should be indifferent towards religion. That is not the case anymore today. And so not only do you have that, the inextricable link between Islam and Malay, but then that also drowns out or suppresses the legitimate concerns that people of different race and religion have. And that's not elevated to the national discourse because that's just not the priority, or that's not what wins votes, right? So I think there are several issues there, and it's not easy to move past that. But I have seen, we're talking today about civil society, right? But that's why I'm really hopeful for civil society in Malaysia, because I have seen my colleagues in civil society come up with programs and projects that tries to have these common spaces where we can talk about our differences and not want to fight or kill one another, right? So so this is important to think about, and I would like to see how do we move as a society and really acknowledge that we do have different needs and wants and desires, and not make that a cause of social division. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting, because I think the main point here was having a platform to be able to discuss things, and media plays a big role too. And coming back to the mobilization, there's a need to find a common ground. Then I come to you, Tharma, because I think the youth is the new black. Everybody's talking about the youth in GE15. Youth has been taken as the kingmakers before the election, later was blamed for the green wave that happened in Malaysia. So there's a lot of discussion talking about youth, and in your mobilization work, you guys have been really successful. The fact that 79% of voters aged 18 to 20 actually voted for GE15, came out to vote during GE15, shows there's a willingness, and the youth, they are interested. And I would like to know how you achieve that. What's the common ground? Is it enough to just be young, or there has to be more work? And also the tools that you guys have used in order to achieve that 79% voters turnout?
All right, hi everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Thank you very much to Global Bersih, to Bersih and also KF for organizing. So when it comes to the youth, I think it is the enigma, isn't it? And a lot of people have a lot of questions. And for us, I think we can only grasp at some ideas, and we can look at certain trends and try to figure out what do young people really want, because the reality is that, and I really want to point this out, that young people are not a monolith. We are not a singular block, and there's not one single mind, unified mind, like, you know, if Dharma says this, therefore all these million young people will agree with him. Unfortunately, that's not true. I wish that was true, but it's not. So first thing is that I want to first and foremost challenge the idea of a green wave, right? This is something that I've said even on election night, and it's something that I continue to say now. I don't necessarily believe that a green wave happened in the way that we believed it. So what is a green wave? A green wave fundamentally is a shift towards conservatism, right? That young people en masse chose conservative politics, that is support of conservative organizations. I don't necessarily think this is the truth. I think the reality is that Malaysia is a deeply polarized country already, right? You look at multiple generations, and in terms of our discourse, in terms of religion, in terms of ideas of how we want to build this country together, we have huge, massive differences between us. And this is part of it, as Ira mentioned. It lies in our education system. It lies in our institutions. It lies in how we do our town planning and how we divide ourselves into different communities. So this is something that already exists, right? But what I would argue is that the movement towards, or the choices that young people made in this election was primarily led by the anti-corruption wave that we had for not just in this election, but was started in GE 12, was started in 2008, was started by movements like Bersih, right, and many other civil society organizations to fight against corruption, fight against mismanagement, and that's essentially where we are today. So what happened was that a lot of liberal or progressive young Malaysians had already decided to move camp. They decided to shift over and say that let's not vote for the establishment anymore. But what happened, the unique factor that happened in this last general election was that there was an alternative for your conservative voters. Because if you ask a conservative voter in terms of would you be comfortable in terms of voting for progressive parties or parties that are more, that are less ethnocentric, right? Or parties that champion less on race and religion issues, that would be a deep insecurity and a deep sense of discomfort with that idea. However, when there is an opportunity or when there's an alternative, that essentially represented the shift. So which means that young people did not become more conservative overnight. What just represented was that there was a shift where there was a credible enough conservative option. So, and you saw that in the polls, right? I think Dr. Bridget Welch did a really great analysis showing that the top two winners of the youth vote were Pakatan Harapan and Perikatan Nasional, two polar sides of the ideological spectrum, but they won big, right? The biggest losers were, unfortunately or fortunately, depends on who you are on your stance, political stance, was Barisan Nasional, right? Because of the perception of corruption, perception of arrogance, right? These were the key things that were there, right? So I think that was the first part that was very important. Number two was that, for me, I always believed that young people care. Young people are interested. Young people want to be involved, right? And that was why we fought for Undi 18. And that's why we continue to fight for Undi 18, because for us, we always say this, it's not just about the right to vote. Rights is just one layer in terms of democratic discourse. More than rights is representation, right? Are you represented enough in Parliament? Are you represented in terms of the issues that you believe in, and in terms of the issues that the government is championing to make your lives better? That's one. Number two is, of course, responsibility, because rights must come with responsibility. Are we educating our young people enough? Are they sufficiently given the right tools? Are they given the right responsibilities suitable for their age in society? So I think all this comes hand in hand, right? Not just rights, but also representation and responsibility. So for me, I think as an organization, it's something that we continue to want to be able to champion, and we want to continue to fight for. And that is something that resonates with many young Malaysians across the country, that believe that this is something that we need to fight for and we need to fix. That a lot of things with our political system is not right. That when we see our politicians being corrupt, when we see our politicians doing very dodgy things, when we see our politicians, doing things that are completely not in the interest of the general public, but it's only in their own personal interest, it's something that needs to be changed. And there's a lot of willingness from young people to take the risk and let's try with the other side. So for me, I think the biggest improvement that I want to emphasize or want to champion is that number one is, of course, we should give more, more information and more structured systems of understanding so that.
So there are lots of laws, direct, indirect pressure that actually makes it difficult to do balanced reporting or to be more transparent. And we can be proud that we got promoted from number 113 in the World Press Freedom Index to number 73. It's a movement to the right direction, that's true. I'm interested to know if that really reflects the reality today. And I would like to know also, what do the parliamentarians or the civil society need to understand about the role of media, and how can they support and work with the media so that the media is given the chance to fulfill its purpose as the watchdog and the fourth pillar of democracy.
Thank you, Mala. Hello to fellow panels and everyone here. I'm Razi, and from an organization called Gerakan Media Merdeka or Geram. So we've been doing media advocacy and mostly highlighting the problems that journalists and media organizations have. That was, sadly, before this wasn't really highlighted, not being discussed by the government or anyone in power. So I think that with the ranking, the reporter Sans Frontier, our Reporter Without Borders, every year reports about the ranking of media freedom. That means how the media was perceived to be free of from government shackles or from conflict zones. It's a step in very good direction, mostly because I think for the first time in 2 years, I think we never have one journalist arrested. I mean, the last time a journalist was called by the police was in 2021 because of reportings, because of the rules, and before this no one cares. And frankly, for problem with journalists, no one cares except for journalists themselves and other media organizations, and mostly. And because there are no big layoff from media company, because our industry now basically has gone, compared to when I started in the early 2000s, it's barely half of what it used to be. So to understand the thing about ranking, I don't think people really care about the ranking. It's just the organization, but it presents that Malaysia, it's the copy that you read or you watch is easier, is freer, and it basically depicts both sides. And basically, it's freer now lah. At least you could have Melissa could talk to Party A and Party B, which is really hard to do before. I think before 2020. Yeah, I'm taking consideration to 2018 as well, because the government at that time did the same thing. So to understand what's happening in Malaysia now, you have to understand the role of the media. The role of the media, as we know, is to report, to inform, to educate the people. But we never considered the best, the most important role that the media have is to create discourse. Because before this, in small towns or whatnot, you have TV in a warung somewhere, TV and newspaper in the morning. So people read them, people watch them, watch the news, read the story, which makes news, basically, before this, the one with the highest rating is always news. Berita RTM, Berita Utama, they always have the biggest rating, because people listen to them and that create discourse. People talk about what is happening in their world, what is happening in the country. And this was used as a tool to educate, tool to tell people what is happening, what people should think and what people should talk about. Sure, we have really like a shy society. We don't really talk about what's happening, but people people could just safely do their discourse on the ground, and people don't care. It's local. And then since 2008, I think 2008, you can see that the traditional media has been playing catch up because they can no longer like determine the discourse that people are talking about. We lose to the internet and whatnot, and it's been going on 2008, 2013, 2018, until now 2023. And you see that media couldn't do their most important anymore. So they just spew everything and try to present themselves. Okay, we are here, and then at the same time, this information is there because people has been getting the information, getting the discourse from other sources, from other things that, yeah, basically the internet, the WhatsApp now. I think like we could see, WhatsApp tell me this, so this is happening. People wouldn't go to watch Melissa shows at all. No. And I think Tama understand because the campaign of Undi 18 was mostly done through social media and whatever. It's not through traditional news media. So, but that's the thing because media think that okay, it's easier to reach them now. We have everything. Before this, we could only track people who have TV. We could only track people who buy newspaper. But now you wouldn't know. But you have that big audience. Sorry, step on his shoes. You have big audience. You have this really big narrative that you're trying to push, but you don't know what people are choosing. And I think it's done. That's why the project, I think, akin to what our friend from the Philippines did. This information could be fought with engagement from the community. And the keyword is the community itself, the local, from the ground up. People who really know what is happening in there is to direct, is to educate. So I think media has, I think although it's like 90% different from before where we could spend advertising money like, yeah, when I joined, I still remember my senior said, you can go overseas like every month. No, it didn't happen. It's not like that anymore. It's not the 90s or early 2000s where, yeah. So it's good because it's for the first time, I think even the representative, I mean NGOs, politicians, took the community, just directly engage the community, and this organization that has national reach, like the news media. I mean, like Melissa have like lots of. I'm only using her because everyone knows her from the TV. Have like fans, and just it's a family face. People love to see family face. That's one of the way where you can like get people to understand and see what do you want to see, how to educate and whatnot. I think otherwise, I think this is the only way for everyone to play a role if you really want to get to fight disinformation and to basically to have a good discourse again.
Thank you very much. So basically, it is improving. So there is a possibility that we can be more balanced on the seesaw that Melissa was describing just now. So that's good. I just want to ask a question to the audience now. Just put up your hands. How many of you, no, it's not question time yet, but how many of you actually still read newspapers, print newspapers? Put up your hands. Okay, very good. How many of you get your information? That means in Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, everywhere else. Okay, not real information, not to spy on your neighbors, okay? So if these were the people you're going to mobilize, you realize that all of us have to move forward too. So we have to move forward with the digital media, with the social media. So this is a question to all of you. I mean, social media is such a huge thing, but we cannot run away from it. I'll just give you a short example. I represent an organization and we advocate voting rights and mobilize overseas Malaysians all over the world. That means we have to mobilize overseas Malaysians that live from Antarctica to the Fiji Islands. And we can only do it through social media. During the general elections, the main platform that we use to coordinate ballot collection from the whole world is on Facebook page. So that's the power of social media. And I think in a country like Malaysia, it's not there yet. I think the youth, they are very into it. Social media is a very important point, but there's lots of conversation going on the negative part of it, the negative implication. So my question is also for you, Marlon, because I think you guys did a very interesting concept of fake news or narrative. So maybe I start with you. So what's the power of social media? How can CSOs and everyone, parliamentary CSOs, use it positively? And how can we navigate the negative implications? Maybe simple, I know it's a huge subject, but we cannot get away from it. Maybe just some guidance with your Philippines experience.
Thank you, Nirmala. Again, I definitely, the sharing that have been done so far resonate with our experience in the Philippines. And when it comes to social media, Philippines is one of the favored case studies, being the patient zero, so-called patient zero for disinformation, also social media capital of the world. So many Filipinos are just so in love with Facebook. And that makes it very tough. At the same time, it's worth mentioning, of course, all of the positives as well. Our organization have had many opportunities working with the local office of Meta, for example, in conducting digital literacy programs for Filipinos. But at the same time, I think the point that I just want to share is how the shift from this very positive perceptions on the impact of social media to democracy, when it started during the Arab Spring in the early 2010s, they were all saying that social media is so crucial to topple governments, such as what happened in the Arab Spring, early 2010s. But just a matter of 1 decade or so, now people during the 2016 elections in America, also in the Philippines, all the scholars are saying that maybe social media and democracy are incompatible. And so at this point, scholars are just trying to, they use the term cautious optimism to talk about our supposed relationship with social media and its role in democracy. Cautious optimism because we have to recognize all of the positives that it can bring, connecting people for mobilizing, for example. As you said, social media is very crucial to migrant workers, for example, which is something that is a very crucial component of Philippine population. All of the migrant Filipino workers all over the world make use of social media to get together, to mobilize, to learn about what is going on in the country. But at the same time, because of that reality, politicians know that in order for them to mobilize voters, they feed all of these overseas Filipino workers with disinformation. So while they are hundreds of miles away from our country, the information that they receive are very much misleading and slanted towards personal interests of politicians. So I think the way to go really is to find ways for us to demand more accountability from platforms. It's very good that these platforms are able to, for example, in our experience, are able to launch digital literacy programs in the country. We've also had many opportunities to have discussions with them on improving their public policy models and reforms. But I think the major reforms that we really need to see is the design of the platform itself, with how it incentivizes certain kinds of behavior that have been shared already. The kind of information that we consume are those that are already aligned with our beliefs. This kind of behavior, I think, is incompatible with democracy. So in order for us to fix that, the platforms itself have to make tweaks in the way they design their business model, the whole user experience of it, which is of course something that is difficult to do. But if we are able to assert being the major market of these social media platforms, Asian countries, Indonesia is also very fond of all of these products, and perhaps also here in Malaysia. So we need to come together, all of these major markets of these platforms, so we can demand these platform reforms.
Okay, so basically I agree with what he said. He's definitely not ready. Yeah, but adding to it is, yeah, it's the way to come is engagement, because although before this we could only gauge the how do we reach people through subscription. So we see papers got 200,000, so they okay, at least 200,000 people are watching it or reading it, and maybe they would subscribe to the idea. Now you have less subscription. Maybe think like one of the biggest newspaper gone from 500,000 to now less than 20,000 in the span of less than 10 years. But the reach is bigger because now every news media have their own social media account and say, okay, we have 3 million followers for Facebook, we have 2 million followers on Instagram, and several million more on TikTok. So the way, basically the engagement is there, it's hard to see how you get the feedback. And yeah, again, this is what we come back is to work with the community itself, because digital literacy program is good, but Malaysia, we have that digital literacy program, but it's always centered in Kuala Lumpur, Penang, Ipoh, Kota Kinabalu, Kuching. We don't care about like the other, and then we don't understand the sentiment, that's the discourse that needs to be brought up, and the feelings of people who wanted what they wanted and whatnot. And even the news report are not same. And because of less money, I know news organization who didn't even send reporters to like the East Coast. I understand. So you don't know, huh? Because they didn't send reporters there. So even the writing, I mean, like, it cannot be trusted. Yeah, you have fair views from the side, but you don't have your own views. One of the most important role of reporting is to have your eye on the ground, but you don't have that anymore. So how can you do that? So yeah, that's it on my mind.
Melissa, you have anything to add to that?
Well, yes, 100%. The lack of resources is definitely a concern or a challenge to overcome, particularly when you're right. I mean, let's not even talk about East Coast, sending reporters to East Malaysia. That's why we have so many Malaya-centric, Peninsula-centric stories, because there's not enough money to send reporters to cover such a geographically diverse area like Sabah and Sarawak. So again, that's a broken news, the broken business model of news, which we don't expect you to solve today. But
Thank God.
It's a big one. People have spent sleepless nights on it. But it's one of the reasons, or one of the rationales we can use to explain why there is, there are challenges in deepening democracy through the media, and sometimes why we think social media is a shortcut because it's free. We think it's free, but they're taking your data, and democratic, or has been democratized, if I may. So I wanted to add to that in that respect, yes. But I also wanted to maybe caution us to think a little bit more with nuance. And we had this conversation during lunch because of Maha's insightful question. I think she's here. She asked whether there was still interest in politics and governance and democracy. And I would like to just caution, using, broadcasters are guilty of this, using reach and ratings to gauge interest, using engagement to gauge interest. It doesn't represent the full picture and the full story. You may think it's reached a lot of people. You may think a lot of eyeballs or lack of eyeballs on a certain issue. There is something more intangible about the stickiness of a story or a topic that is almost serendipitous. Something happens and then it's the right time and a bit of luck, like Dharma was saying, with Undi 18. all of that comes into play. So let's be a bit more nuanced when we talk about how effective social media can be in mobilizing, or how ineffective media can be in getting a narrative out. So there's a bit more nuance to be considered there.
Next to you.
Okay, as the non-media person here, I'm not sure what to add, but I think maybe I can just relate it a bit to this idea of social media being the tool that has democratized knowledge, and I agree with that. So I'm on the side where you know, the negative implications that social media has had on our democracy, which is very real. You know, our Marlon has mentioned the Philippine election, and also, of course, we all know about the US elections. All of that is really true and is important to think about, although I'm not sure, you know, the US way of sort of handling it, which is, you know, calling all these social media bosses to Congress and interrogating them, is the right way. I mean, I'm sure you all have seen all the funny videos of the old congressmen in the US interrogating Mark Zuckerberg, and Mark Zuckerberg sitting there like, that's not how the internet works, guys. So yeah, I don't know if that's the right way to handle it over there. But I think what we need to remember is with the negative implications that has arisen from social media use, you know, that is that's just the consequence of social media being a platform that everyone can use, and that has allowed you know, people from different backgrounds and all walks of life to use and to participate in any sort of discourse, right? Whether it's political or about sports or entertainment or gossip or whatever it is. So, you know, that rule applies to just any platform that advocates for free speech in general. You cannot just support it when the impact is favorable to you, right? So that is what we must remember. And this relates back to, I think Tarma was talking about how post GE15, everyone was suddenly blaming young people and saying that, oh, now we didn't educate young people enough, so they voted for the wrong party, right? And yeah, so what, are we saying that only smart people can vote? Only people who received a certain education can vote? These are very dangerous. These are very dangerous notions. Yeah, I mean, you know, countries. We have had countries, different countries all around the world who have limited voting rights precisely because of this, because of age or gender or the color of your skin. So yeah, so in this vast world where you know, where we want free speech, but then we don't want it when it doesn't favor us, I think this is something we need to always keep at the back of our minds when we are talking about social media. And social media is a new frontier. Well, I don't think it's new anymore, but it's this challenging frontier that we have to face. But we have to remember that, you know, I don't know, a few decades ago, maybe a century ago, when radio was invented, I think people had the same, well, people were freaking out, right? Oh no, now peasants can listen to the king give a speech. Oh no, what are we going to do? So, you know, this kind of concerns arise as we have new forms of communication that comes out. So, yeah, that's this.
And Tarma?
All right, I want to just talk about two things. Number one is the question of how can CSOs react or work with social media. And just a little bit of the background of Undi 18, we started off and launched as a purely social media centric youth advocacy movement for the lowering of the voting age in Malaysia. So this is something that we're very familiar with, right? And I think social media is a tremendous force for good, a tremendous you know, a loudspeaker for championing the issues that you believe in, right? That's something I want to emphasize. But I want to say that's something that we all agree with, right? And that's something that I think a lot of people already know. But I want to give another counter opinion over there, right? Which is that people sometimes, even progressive organizations, CSOs, even government sometimes, right? We sometimes overestimate, in a way, social media. I know some organizations underestimate, right? And that's a bad thing. But I also think some organizations overvalue, and they think that social media is everything. Right? It's the be-all, end-all of human relationship, is the be-all, end-all of politics. And that's not necessarily the truth, right? The reality is that if you look at how politics is in many countries, right, and even in Malaysia, even if you look at civil society organizations, from my experience, there are a lot of organizations that are purely social media centric, and they never make the next step of looking at relationship building, at looking at direct advocacy, at looking at meeting stakeholders, convincing them. In fact, one of the most important things that that we did, when we first started with our advocacy, was that we had a town hall, or we had forums where we just invited people who disagreed with the lowering of the voting age and said that, come over, ask us questions. If you disagree with us, okay, come, let me try to reason with you, right? And we've had volunteers who have told me much later on, many months later, who said that it was because of that forum and listening to you argue against that point that I was like, I actually agree with Undi 18, that lowering the voting age makes sense, right? So I do think that in-person communication, that in-person touch is still incredibly valuable. And if you're a civil society organization, if you're a young person, I think it's often very good to not forget that. And essentially work in tandem, right? So you do your social media work, but you still do your on-the-ground work. You still do your mobilization. You still work with your volunteers. You still work and meet your stakeholders, and sometimes you say direct action. Like a lot of times, direct action means you go down on the ground and protest, right? And sometimes it's not just about saying that you disagree with something online, because a lot of people can say that I disagree with something, but then the news cycle changes and people forget, right? And just like that, a lot of people, 1,000 people saying, I'm so angry about this. But then the next day, you're angry about something else, right? The next day, you're angry about something else. In a week, do you even remember that? In a month, do you even remember that? In a year, it's just behind your mind. That's why direct action and mobilization and that physical presence is so important. That's number one to always remember. And the second part I want to share is in terms of fake news and in terms of how we should adapt. And I totally agree with everyone that we need better legislation. We need better coordination between Southeast Asian, ASEAN countries to advocate for rights, just as the European Union have pushed for certain sort of legislative change. I totally agree with that. But I also think that another thing that we also should look into is how do we develop narratives of our own? And that's something that's so important. Because the reality is that if we are always playing a catch-up game in terms of legislation, we are always playing a catch-up game in terms of countering misinformation, right? But the truth is that, or the reality is that, by the time the truth wears their pants, the lie has run halfway around the world, right? So what can you do? So for me, I always believe that if you're a progressive organization, or if you're an organization that wants to push your narrative out, you just have to go and just do it, right? Just have to be aggressive about it, just have to be relentless about it, be persistent about it, and put your narrative out there. Of course, you have the certain strategies. Of course, that's a conversation for another day of how you can do it better and all that. But the idea is that you have to say or speak your own truth, right? And not just be responsive in nature. And I think the challenging thing about social media is that often when we react to something, it even gives more credibility and more fire to the original attack, or the original fake news, or the original disinformation. And that's how the algorithms work, right? Not in your favor, against your favor, right? So I think that's something that I want to emphasize, that we got to change our strategy, and we got to rethink a lot of things as we grow into a world where social media is so important. Maybe, we have to reflect and see what really works and what doesn't work. Right.
Thank you, Tram. I think it's a good point. We have to balance having 1,000 people on the streets and 1,000 likes. There's a big difference. I would like to thank the panels very much for the very interesting, exciting exchange today. I'm sure the participants are just waiting to ask questions and grill them and roast them. I'm getting very excited about it. So any questions from the audience? I told you, let me start. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh yeah, I forgot they're at the back. So let's just make the first round and then we'll go for the second round, okay? Thank you.
May I begin first, please, because I have to run. Hi, I'm Senator Ras. I'm over here. Sorry, I'm a bit short. Being a media person, a veteran media person, I really appreciate hearing all your views. I thank you. But I think we have to come down to the ground and realize that not everybody is savvy in social media. We still have a lot of people in the rural areas who don't even have a phone, you know, to go through FB, or don't even know how to use them properly. So on your idea just now to also do things traditionally is good, because we really need to go on the ground. That's one thing. And we have to realize when we use social media, you know, sometimes people think that they have the right and the prerogative to just hit and you know, scrutinize or, you know, bring someone down. They don't realize that there is a human being on the other side. They don't realize that they're hurting somebody's feeling. So the most important thing is we have to make sure we manage people's perception. What we would like them to do and have them understand, we go down and speak to them like how we used to do before. One is going on the ground. Yes, we can use social media, but also use, you know, like play with their hearts and their emotions. And then we talked about how is it that the younger people, we spoke about they are coming out to vote. Actually, out of 10, realistically, probably only 3 or 4 wants to do it. You know why? Because they only do it because their parents are doing it. They say, Mom, Dad, are you voting? Who are you voting? A or B or C? Father or mother says A. I say, okay, then we'll just vote A. They don't have a mind of their own just yet. So that's why it's very important for us to educate them, even from school, to understand how it works, democracy. And I have to tell you that, you know, during the elections, a lot of the youths, they stay at the stalls. They sit down and they drink teh tarik, and somebody comes up to them and say, I'll give you $50 or $100 and you go and vote. They're like, they look at each other, okay, let's finish our teh tarik first and then we'll go. That's how it works, because they're not used to it. So it's very important for us. If we want them to come out, we have to educate them and make them understand. Secondly, you think that social media is the thing? Not really. Veterans, old people, you know, the otais, we call it, they still prefer for us to come down on the ground and speak to them eye to eye, you know, and say, this is situation, this is what it is, you know. And social media is social media, but the reality is on the ground. We're talking about people. If we want them to come out and vote for us, we need to make them understand. And having adab is having manners, the way we speak, the way we reach out to people. That's very important. These days, everybody is so quick sending messages out on social media, like you're talking about, you know, like some things they write about, it's not the truth. I mean, being in with Bernama, you know, we have fact checks. But like you said, by the time the truth comes out, all the lies goes out. Fitnah is out there. People are just spreading lies. So it is our responsibility to make sure, you know, having Bersih and all of us in here, to make sure that the truth goes out, you know, because karma is in real time. Kifarah is in real time. You do good, good will come back to you. If you don't, it will turn around and hit you, not in 10 years, in 5 minutes. So if you want something, go out, be there. You know, just get up, dress up, and show up, and tell them this is what it is. I'm a leader, and I'd like you to vote for me. This is what I am all about. Not just on the phone, because we're talking about human beings. They're out there. The makciks, the pakciks, the uncles, the aunties, they want to come out and listen to us. The younger generation, they want to be there and be part of everything.
Thank you very much for your perspective. I think you're trying to say that we have to have a balance as we move forward. I think that's the point. Can I have the next question, please? Yeah. Thank you.
Ui Heng from the Kuala Lumpur and Selangor Chinese Assembly Hall. My question is to all the local panelists. I hope each of you will reply to my question. In the context of media freedom and democratization, what's your comment on Fahmi Fazil's performance as Minister of Communication and Digital? Thank you.
Who would like to take the question? Okay, go for it, Melissa.
All right. Wow, you really gave us a tough one there. Technically, Fahmi is like the boss, right? for all journalists. Okay, here's what I can say. I haven't interviewed him yet as minister. He hasn't set a date yet, which I am putting out there in the universe. But what I do like in my observations is he's got really interesting people heading some of the legacy organizations. His portfolio is not easy, it's huge, it is massive. It's not just communications, it's the technology around communication, it's entertainment, it's culture, it's soft power, all of that. But he seems to have been able, in the short time that he's been in there, to get the buy-in of the civil service and place very smart and effective people at the heads of these organizations. And while I think we have to be patient for change, to see change be implemented and strengthening of these organizations, I think there's a start there. And that's my observation. I can say that honestly, that I like what I see in terms of the people that he's picked to move his agenda forward.
Can I add one thing? Okay. As we know, 2 days ago, we had one meeting for Malaysia Pro-Term Media Council. And under Fahmi leadership, we almost finished the draft of the Media Council, the first ever Media Council in Malaysia. And actually, the conversation about Malaysia self-regulating media has been going on since the 70s. So I think Fahmi now is heading to the right direction. I wouldn't say anything personally, but in the media freedom sphere, it is heading that. I think we could have, like this year, we could table our first Media Council Act in Parliament.
Oh, that's positive.
I would like to, not on Fahmi Fazil's performance, but I would like to add just some comments on, I'd just like to add to some of the comments that's been brought up. Okay, firstly, I think, again, especially after PRU 15, more and more talk has come about how we need to educate our young about democracy and about politics, which I agree with, that we really need that. But I think I have several concerns about that. Because firstly, I think every time we talk about educating our young people, and I think, I'm not sure if Maha probably has brought this up before, but if we do it through schools, it will just be another part of the syllabus, and then it'll be an exam, and then teachers who are already overburdened with work will have to mark yet another exam, and students will just do it to pass an exam, which we all clearly know doesn't work. So how are we going to do it? I think is something we need to think about. That does not overburden our teachers, that does not give our students more exams. I'm personally a fan of why not we try out electing our student councils in schools, right? If you really want to teach kids about democracy, that's democracy. Practice it, right? But I mean, that requires an entire paradigm shift in how schools operate in general, that I have no idea if that's even possible. But for me, if you want to teach kids about democracy, let them practice it. You know, run a political campaign in school. I mean, a campaign for your, whatever it is that you believe in, right? That's first. And secondly, I think when we talk about educating our young on democracy and on politics, I mean, if we are going to educate young people about democracy, technically it's telling young people that use your right to vote for whoever that you believe in or that you want to see leading the country. Yeah, and my fear with some of the progressive voices that I see coming out saying that we need to educate our kids on democracy, what some of these voices actually mean is you need to educate our kids to vote for the right party. Okay, and you know, this might sound a bit controversial, but I think my fear is that, and again, as we have also said in this panel, you know, having the right to vote in a democracy means you can choose whoever you want to be your leader, whichever party you want, yeah? And again, those who are fearful of the so-called green tsunami or the green wave, I think also forget that the green wave, which is past, has educated children for decades, since they're young, in kindergarten, right? So, yeah, so they have done this education. So what is the so-called progressive answer to that, right? So this is something that we don't really think about when we talk about we need to educate young people. So yeah, and again, there's always a fine line between, you know, saying that we need to educate our young and also being
you know, what Melissa and Tarma was saying, which is like, you know, assuming that our young people don't know things or they don't want to participate. Young people are at the forefront of so many causes in Malaysia and around the world, yeah? The Lawan protest, the Hatal Doctor contract protest would not have happened. The climate change protest would not have happened without the passion and the interest of young people, right? But what is lacking is young people's interest in partisan politics. And we can have a whole other panel on why that is. And I think that's on political parties to reflect. Why is it that young people are not interested in you know, in joining us and running for elections? That's a whole other panel that we can do a whole other panel on that, yeah.
Okay, Tarma, before you answer, I'll take a few other questions and then we can compile it, yeah? Please.
Hi, my name is Anusha. I'm representing Mekar Kami, a youth-led group championing political participation for women and girls. So based on the earlier discussion, we discussed the role of the media, CSOs, and the youth in shaping discourse for reforms and change. However, I think we need to consider the aspect of safeguarding young people and children that CSOs and media choose to spotlight in public, especially where they would risk educational opportunities and even backlash in their own communities as young people who speak about political issues. So my question is, how have you, as a media practitioner and CSO leader, protected and supported minors and young adults from these repercussions? And my second question is, youth politics and advocacy is so personality driven. So what are your thoughts? How do we branch out from that? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one more question from the other side and then we'll start.
Sorry. My question is, so I'm gonna just say it out loud. As an example, Haraka Daily, right? Some of their title is very controversial and it is influencing the parents and it is also influencing the youth that are reading the Haraka Daily websites and the titles. Like before the GE15, there was a lot of controversial titles from Haraka Daily that are like condemning the other parties or anything. Then the other thing, my question is, how do we prevent our youth from getting into that bubble of like people from Haraka Daily influencing the youth and parents to go to a certain party by using fake news and more? And my another question is, so Undi 18 have done a great job by lowering the voting age, which is above 18 and above. And also, we did Class Politik 101 with Y Politics, Arus Anak Muda. And that was before GE15. And after GE15, we already made like Undi 18 and above very great. But what is the next move? What is the next move for the youth that are 18 and above? Because we are only focusing on the youth 18 and above on and before politics, before the general election. After general election, the youth are just let go and we are not focusing on them and the youth just forgets everything about the general election. That's all, thank you.
Okay, maybe we'll tackle the question with the safeguarding. Who would like to take that? Oh, okay.
To respond about the safeguarding and about the misleading headlines, I think this is why we need to have a self-regulatory media which adhere to code of ethics. I think every news organization have their own code of ethics and we even have like a unified code of ethics since the 70s from the Malaysia Press Institute, which wasn't adopted that much. But I think most of traditional media, mainstream newspaper subscribe to code of ethics, which means that no photos of minors, no sensationalizing about certain cases victim, no what graphic scenes on suicides or on in war zones and whatnot. We have that and it was put in place, but it is in-house. It's not enforced by rules and regulation. And for that, for the misleading headlines by news organization, and to say that, I mean, Haraka is a party newspaper. And no, I used to have a lot of respect for Harakah because some of my teachers, when in my youth, when I learned how to write politically, working in Harakah, but they wasn't there anymore. It is, well, basically, I think Harakah has been sued like 5 times since 2000, a few years ago. And yeah, it shows that in democracy you could have that. And it's to fight the news is like that. So basically it's a propaganda. It's a propaganda piece. So I think to educate, you have to understand what is traditional and what is news organization, social media, and also propaganda piece. I'm not saying just on PN, but PN and PH have their own propaganda machinery as well. Just watch that.
Yeah. I think just to be a bit savvy as to, I think media ownerships need to know which parties are affiliated with which media. It's helpful when you consume the news. Just very quickly to address the safeguarding of minors. Essentially, most newsrooms ask their parents for permission before, but there really is no way to safeguard minors from backlash of appearing on media, and that's the responsibility of the parents, I would say, for minors. Okay, on the question about cult personalities, listen, it's everywhere. There is a personality associated to championing a cause, and that often advances that cause, right? But what I do want to point out, perhaps in the Malaysian context, is the cult personalities of politics. I think Marlon mentioned a bit earlier about politicians as celebrities in the Philippines. We have that here too. We also have this glorification of politicians. I do say it is more obvious during times of crisis. If we saw during the pandemic, there was a lot of hero worshipping going around. We often frame times of crisis like the pandemic and constitutional crisis and political crisis and fall of democratically elected governments. We often frame those times in terms of war framing, where we think that a few good men, and I stress the word men, will come and save the day, right? So, and that's often a Malaysian, the way we often frame or we look at it in terms of savior and scapegoat, and we want those saviors, and that's sometimes the media often plays to that tendency, and I confess sometimes the media also is complicit or is at fault in not challenging those assumptions. That's just my input.
Sure. I think you've covered those parts. Yeah, because there are a couple of questions about Undi 18 I want to sort of respond to. So number one is that what is the next move for those who are 18 and above, especially post-elections? I think that's something that's very relevant, very important. For me, I want to share and want to advocate and want to emphasize that we got to talk about gerrymandering, malapportionment, right? That's something that's so important. I know we like to talk about education, but the reality is that even if you have a very educated urban population, which most young Malaysians are, if your power and your ability to influence change is minimized because the system, the democratic system, is biased against you, then it's difficult, right? You can invest in all the education we want, but we won't get the outcomes that we want in an ideal world, right? So we have to fix the system. Right now with malapportionment, when you compare the smaller seat to the bigger seat, there's a difference of almost 11 times. Right, 11 times their value of the vote, right? And that's something that is, I think it's something that's absurd that we have to be able to fix together. That's number one. Number two is that I do think that, of course we can do more in terms of institutionalizing and emphasizing. I don't believe that we need to change any syllabus because there's a lot, honestly, there's so much in our syllabus already. It's just a matter of reprioritizing and sort of figuring out within our current mechanism, how do we elevate certain things? For example, in Malay language or English language classes, could we have conversations on society? Could we have, ujian lisan or your public speaking on certain topics of society or policy? It's just minor shifts within the system that will not burden a teacher that has that huge effect over the long term. So I think those are things that I want to emphasize. And the last part, I just want to respond to Ms. Samantha just now, where she talked about how young voters go out because their parents vote. So there's a few things over there. Number one is that based on research by Ilham Center, that's actually not true. right? Because the research has showed that young urban voters tend to overwhelmingly, based on record, vote away from what their parents decide. That's something that's there, but the trend is different with rural voters. So rural voters tend to be more community-centric, more family-centric, so there is that attachment to family ties and what your family has. But you look at evidence, right? When you look at 2013, you look at 2018, and you look at our recent general election, young Malaysians often voted very differently based on data and stats compared to what their parents voted. In fact, in 2018, when PH came into power, young voters overwhelmingly voted for PH, and their parents overwhelmingly voted for BN. So to say that young voters are just following, I don't necessarily think that's true, although of course we should emphasize education and improve the process, definitely, and improve political maturity. I totally agree. But I do want to emphasize young voters are voting independently. They are taking into account a variety of opinions, including their parents and including social media, including their friends. And I think that's part of what makes democracy work, right? But of course, we can make it work better. And that's a conversation that we have to have. But that's the fundamental core principles of how democracy is, right? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can we have the next question? We'll make the next question round. Yeah, we'll start with you.
Allah. Okay. Hello, good afternoon. I'm Huda from Sisters in Islam. So basically, this is my comment throughout this discussion, right? With regard to the young voters, I think I would like to disagree with Dharma, because you said that the green wave is actually something that is not, that is not so true. But we already predicted that in 2022 with Merdeka Center and Sisters in Islam survey, Muslim youth survey, where we found that 82% of Muslim youth believe that Quran should be the source of our constitution. So it's basically, we actually underestimate the Islamization process that happened at the political level and also at the cultural level. So I tell you that political Islam really focuses on youth as the one who has been brought up in an Islamist environment. We already we are taught to be politically aware, to change our society and our country to become more Islamized. So the idea of political Islam, we never debunk that in front, in public discourse so much, but it really affected our society, our societal fabric, and the way how, they behave. And they had done this for decades. My parents and me and the younger generations. So what we found in that survey was that our youth of 15 to 25 the Muslim youth basically are more conservative than the youth 10 years before, because we had conducted the same survey in Indonesia as well, Malaysia. So we found that. So, because you mentioned about the anti-corruption is part of political Islam idea. It's because the idea of you must choose a political leader that is clean of sins and whatever. So anti-corruption is part of that. So it's basically political Islam has been successfully penetrated our society at the very deep level. And one of the things that I found is that even when I was very at the young age, I also believe that Quran should be the source of our constitution. And it's really hard for me to undo that until I just got to realize that at the age maybe nearly 30, I realized that this idea is not true. So what I'm trying to say is that not many work has been done to undo this indoctrinated idea where Islam should be the main source of the policy of this country. So I think this is the task upon all of us, the liberal progressives, CSOs, to really work on how to undo this political Islam idea in our society. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Dia Rizki from Jejaka. I'm an LGBT activist and advocate for HIV/AIDS awareness. So I wanted to talk about the point about impartiality in media that was raised by Melissa. In my opinion, I think impartiality can come off as a little dishonest sometimes with regards to reporting. And I think the reason behind that is because there's a difference between impartiality, being neutral, versus being objective, right? There are certain objective truths that are rooted in evidence, research. So under the guise of neutral discussions, impartial discussions, there's always, on one end, you have experts in their field, who do a lot of research, and on the other end, you have full-blown transphobes, homophobes, racists, right? So how can you justify that as something neutral, right? So, and maybe this is not so much a problem in English media, but I think with regards to media that is mainly in Malay, it is quite an issue. Sinar Harian, for example, they had a discussion about PrEP medication to prevent HIV. And on one hand, they had Dr. Adiba, who has decades of research. He's a doctor, expert in AIDS. And on the other end, we had Dr. Rafida Hanim, who's a known transphobe, right? So I think this is problematic because, you know, the discourse that follows these sort of discussions through social media, through real life, real lived experiences, it causes a lot of, it affects the key affected populations of HIV in accessing life-saving healthcare. So my question is, I think, what is your view on this? And do you think that, you know, large media bodies should take a objective stance on what is right? And if you do believe so, what is stopping you from doing that? Thank you.
And your final question for the session?
Right, thank you. Hi, my name is Mohsen Azman. I'm from Baharu Group Asia. So earlier we did touch on addressing censorship surrounding controversial or inflammatory individuals, propaganda news outlets, etc., to prevent indoctrination, especially among youths who remain vulnerable and lack proper understanding of the nuances of politics, especially in the context of Malaysia, with regard to race and religion, all those inflammatory ideas. While this is concerning and you know, it is something that definitely merits the attention, to what extent does active measures against these actors remain within the definition of democracy, and where do we draw the line to mitigate authoritarian tendencies by the government with regard to control, censorship and control of media? Thank you.
Ira, would you like to take the final question first? Yeah.
I was thinking maybe I'll respond to Huda's question. Okay. Thanks, Huda. I think Huda and I have been in countless forums discussing this topic. Before that, I think what apa yang Huda cakap tu is I agree, and it's definitely a concern. Although I do think we need another panel to discuss that, but I'm just bringing it back to what I mentioned earlier about yeah, I think some of the mistakes that I see, you know, some of us in the sort of liberal or progressive CSO movement makes is underestimating the impact of political Islam, of Islamization of our society. And you know, I'm sitting here fully aware that you know, these kinds of conversations are difficult to have because, you know, when we talk about this, then, you know, people, it's very easy to spin it into, you know, it's Islam's fault, which it is not, obviously. And I think, you know, post PRU 15, again, this continued discussion about, you know, educating our young, and this goes back to what Maha said. What is educating our young? What is that common values, or you know, how do we do it? Because if you want to educate our young on, you know, on constitution or how Malaysia is founded, you know, then we also need to have that space where we talk about, you know, our history, or the compromises that were made when our country was founded is there, it's real, right? So, you know, and that, you know, UMNO, MCA and MIC got together as a coalition that with different parties that took care of the interests of different races, you know, and again, this also relates to what I said before of having a platform where we need to talk about these differences. And, you know, it's not just like, yeah, you know, I think some of the discourses that I've heard is also like, oh, you know, to counter the Islamist narrative or the Islamization narrative of the other side is, yeah, you must portray Malaysia as a, you know, we are a liberal, secular nation. I mean, that's not really true either. You know, religion, especially Islam, is embedded in almost every facet of our society. And yeah, having this idea that the counter to that is to make Malaysia more liberal and secular, I don't think that is possible, and I think that is also discounting the impact of Islamization and also the very real concerns and fears that people have of, you know, when you talk about Malaysia needs to be more liberal and secular, whatever that means. Yeah, so this requires a lot of thought from the progressive and liberal movement, I think. I don't think we've really given it that much thought, and you know, there's a lot of taking for granted on our side, and a lot of assuming things about one another, and I think that needs to change first before we sort of really think about what it means to live in this multiracial nation. So yeah, so this is why I keep emphasizing on that. And yeah, so, and you know, I work in a think tank in public policy, and I have sat in meeting rooms with politicians from all sides, including from PN, including from PAS, and you know, this impression of them being, you know, very conservative, very religious, very, you know, that's not always true. There are, you know, professionals and, you know, people who are very articulate in institutional reforms, in anti-corruption, in human rights even, who are, you know, represented in their party, right? So maybe that's room for us to engage as well, right? So yeah, so I think that's my my response to that. And there was another question on social media being used for
social media being used for hate speech or to perpetrate authoritarian.
Yeah, yeah. I think this is a difficult one because for me, it's. I think Melissa talked about the seesaw, right? Which I like that analogy because, yeah, because when thinking about how social media can be used and weaponized for authoritarian tendencies, how do we balance regulating that with potentially, yeah, going after speech or regulating opinions and speech that we just don't like, right? So I'm always really concerned with that. So I'm always on the side of like, of caution when it comes to regulating, controlling social media. Yeah, because technology is a frontier that is, there's two sides to it, right? It's supposed to be free and available to everyone, but on the other hand, because of the way it works and it operates, it tends to bring out all the negative tendencies because then, you know, that gets the eyeballs. So, so I think balancing that is very difficult. I'm not an expert on social media regulation, so I'm not sure if there are countries out there who have managed to strike the right balance, but I think maybe we can learn from those countries, I think. Do you want to add anything, Mel?
Yeah, okay. Yep. So I'm going to add to, well, address your question. I'm so sorry I didn't catch your name. But I'm not going to presume I can speak for Sinar, but I do know that forum, that panel that you were talking about. If I may come back to my very first answer to the very first question you posed with the metaphor of the seesaw again, you were referring to the impartiality and neutrality of the media houses, right? In putting together those types of events or having that balanced reporting, as Nirmala put it. Balance, again, is about having equal representation of opposing views. Now, it's similar to climate change. You don't put climate deniers on the same platform as a climate scientist. We know that that's the science. But also, media houses generally are very cautious about deplatforming someone because they don't suit your worldview. That's a dangerous, slippery slope if we start to say, can't platform you, cancel you, don't want you. It's dangerous, right? So again, comes back to the savviness of the consumer who can look at what can be a false corollary. I struggle with that word. But Dr. Adiba in that forum was as scientific and medical and compassionate as she is, which did wonders to perhaps sway some people who were not agreeing with her in the first place. So having those types of discussions, I'm not saying I agree with them, but we have to be very careful to deplatform someone because they don't subscribe to our worldview. There are lots of people that subscribe to the worldview of that panelist, and maybe by tuning in would have been convinced otherwise. So it goes both ways, and I think that maybe that was one of the reasons why that Sinar put it together.
Thank you, Melissa. Marlon, I'm going to come to you to wrap up, but before that, I'll give Tharma a chance to react.
Sure, I'll just respond very, very quickly to the idea of the green wave by Huda. I think, thank you very much. I think it's a very good and pertinent perspective. I think it's great. I just want to point out, as I said earlier, I recognize that polarization is, as I said, it's a huge problem. It's terrible, right? And we do have to make sure that we do policies to make sure that we reduce our polarization. I think that's something that I totally agree with. But the idea of a wave is something in my, from what I would argue is essentially a shift from the norm, or shift from what is something that was there before. So for me, I think that if you look at voter trends and you look at how we've structured society, we've essentially had conservative politics, whether it is Islamist or just Malay supremacist politics, in, you know, sometimes tied together, sometimes one more stronger than the other, together under this umbrella of conservatism. So I would argue that for the past 50, 60 years, this has been the dominant thing, and I don't really, I find it hard to identify with the argument, just purely based on the numbers, that there was a significant shift demographically and electorally towards more conservatism. I think that's the question that, or that's the part I find it hard to identify with, right? Because if you look at our Malaysian politics, ever since May 13th, right, we've essentially, you know, for context, May 13th was the worst race riots in Malaysian history, where hundreds, if not thousands of people were basically murdered. So we essentially restructured society and our politics ever since then. And that boogeyman was basically used ever since then to sort of scare the minority communities. And that's basically been there for the past how many decades? So if we were to argue that youth are more conservative compared to then, I think I would love to get the data for that, or to have to say that is not representing conservatism, or that's some different ideology. What I would say is that yes, there was a shift towards more Islamic parties, but I do believe that the big factor over here is not necessarily the strength of the Islamic parties, but the weakness of UMNO Barisan Nasional. I think that's another big factor that we have to consider. So I do agree, I totally agree with you, we have to deal with polarization, we have to address it, but at the same time, if we want to understand demographics, I don't think it suits us to say say, oh my goodness, young people are going to be so conservative and it's a complete difference. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I do think that there is grounds for argument, grounds for convincing, and grounds for outreach. I do think that there is still opportunities there, and that's something that for us, we still have to do. So thank you very much, and I hope that's that sort of response from my end. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Tharma. Yeah, Marlon, you've heard youth speaking, you heard civil society speaking, you heard media speaking, and what would you want us to take home today from you? What should we learn from your presentation? Maybe a few sentences, just one point that we should take home today that might be a guide for us in the future.
I think I've mentioned earlier that, well, I would like to be very careful to make statements that presume that whatever works or whatever challenges that we have in the Philippines would also apply here, because as I've said in my presentation, there are very unique political, historical, social factors that color our democratic life. And in the case of issues related to SOGI, for example, sexual orientation and gender identity and expression, cases, for example, that relates to the protection of the youth when it comes to their participation in civil society and activism, and even the interconnection of race and religion. All of these factors color the democratic life of civil society and also the media here in Malaysia. So I think in our experience, it really takes some courage for people to dare to do the difficult thing, right? This manifests in the work of Undi 18, obviously. But it's also difficult to make the suggestion to simply say be brave or to dare to do different, because it comes with very palpable and serious cases of harassment, for example, for activists. And this is the situation in the Philippines. But I think a lot of people in this room are familiar with the work of Maria Ressa and Rappler in the Philippines. Obviously, she's gone through a lot of series of cases of libel, of a lot of persecution. And obviously, it's one of the reasons how the Nobel Peace Prize actually took notice of her work, because of this bravery, because of this amount of problems that she had to go through, and the Rappler at the same time. So I think civil society really has this important role to do the difficult work, to do the dirty work. When it comes to social media, obviously it's almost a futile discussion to say whether it has good, or I mean if it has the ultimate good for society or the ultimate bad. Because again, we go back to that analogy of the seesaw, very much applies to social media as well. So I think the civil society will really have to find a way to make use of social media proactively, and at the same time really take on the role of addressing digital rights issues, regardless if your concern has to do with race, with religion, with youth empowerment. This is where we are right now. Internet freedom, digital rights is something that we really have to prioritize. That's it for me.
Thank you very much, Marlon. I think we are over time already, so do you have any last words? Anybody wants to share something? Go on.
Yeah. Okay.
You represent the whole panel, okay? So
I just want to say that we are in Parliament, and I think everyone here is representing something that they wanted to, and everyone believe that this would cause our country, our region, our world to get better, because we want an open world, a world where people would talk and solve their differences other than violence. And I think more discourse, more forum, and more engagement with the community and also the powers that be the right direction. And I would like to be thankful of this opportunity, and I hope that we will support each other on things that make us better. Thank you.
And
yeah, I'll just add one more thing. This is the last panel, so I would really like to congratulate Global Bersih Kofi Annan Foundation for an amazing 2-day conference. I'm very honored to be part of this panel. I just wish there were more members of Parliament who joined us throughout these 2 days. It's a bit empty on that side.
Okay,
so,
on that
yeah.
note of Member of Parliament, sorry, I put not select one last thing, right?
We'll never go home.
The political accountability, since we're in Parliament, right? Members of Parliament aren't here, but we are here, so we have to make sure that they stay accountable to us. Now, kalau dia berani buat, kalau dia berani cakap, dia kena berani jawab. So let's make sure that we hold them accountable. I really do want to see that kind of political culture change. Have more politicians dare to go on, hard talk type shows in Malaysia. That's what we really want. The end.
Thank you very much for such young, dynamic speakers we have today. It's amazing. I already feel 10 years younger now sitting here with them, and I hope my passion will also be 10 years younger. I think we spoke about a platform for change, exchange ideas, and let this be one of the platforms that we are talking about. And moving forward, I wish all of you lots of luck. I think that's something that we all need. And I wish a lot of courage, not only by the cliques, also on the streets for the youth. And as I said, all of us are on the same boat. Sometimes it's a small sampan, so we all have to row together. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you to all the participants for listening. And I hope that you learned a lot. I learned a lot today. It's a very eye-opening session for me. And to show our gratitude to the speakers.
Yes, thank you, Nimara, and the panelists. I would like to invite Ms. Corinne to give a token of our appreciations to all the speakers. Please stay put. We have one last sessions to go through before we end the day. Thank you. So this is a wrap for all the sessions for this roundtable. We thank you everyone who make this event a success. To sum up, we would like to invite His Excellency Dr. Justin Lee, the Australia High Commissioner to Malaysia, to give a closing remark. Please put your hand together to welcome Dr. Justin Lee.
It's not working. There we are. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that it's very late in the day and I think you've had very long discussions, so I won't take too much of your time. But I really did just want to acknowledge everybody that is here today and has participated in this roundtable. So especially for those that are here, the honourable senators and members of the Dewan Rakyat and the Dewan Negara. And I think it is a great privilege for all of us to be here in Malaysia's Parliament. Also all the excellencies, the fellow ambassadors and diplomats from the European Union, Canada and others. Thomas Phan, the chairperson of Sesi, Karine Momal Vanian, the executive director of the Kofi Annan Foundation, Nirmala Devi Wingata, the Secretary General of Global Sesi, and really all of the distinguished speakers and panelists from Malaysia and beyond, who we know have travelled from afar to be here. I see my own, I have to acknowledge him, our former Australian MP, Mr. Chris Hayes, but also from other countries that have been here as panellists. And to all of our good friends from civil society, from the youth groups, the think tanks, academia and media. And that last discussion really was fabulous, and I think demonstrates the value of these sorts of open exchanges, being able to hear and share different perspectives on issues. Really does demonstrate the value of such dialogue. I'm very grateful myself for this opportunity, and the Australian High Commission has been very pleased that we've been able to support this important roundtable, again together with our colleagues from the European Union and Canada. And I do wish to congratulate the event organisers, Sesi, Global Sesi and the Kofi Annan Foundation for all their excellent work in facilitating the roundtable and such a fruitful exchange. So please, can you all put your hands together for them once more. And of course, I want to acknowledge and recognise the very important support from the Speaker of the House of Representatives, YB Dato Johari bin Abdul, also the Minister of Law and Institutional Reform, YB Dato Sri Azlina binti Uthman, and all the ministers, MPs and senators who joined over the 2 days, and the panellists who shared their experiences. I think it's very welcome that the Speaker of the Parliament has encouraged such a roundtable as this, and that there's been such great participation from all sides of politics. That in itself, I think, is a great achievement and a demonstration of the Malaysian Parliament's commitment to transparency, dialogue, and further deepening of democracy. And this roundtable, I think, as we're all aware, has come on top of some recent positive developments here in Malaysia, such as the introduction of the special select committees, 10 of them, and many of them are chaired by opposition MPs. And in our experience, those sorts of committees do really play an important check and balance function, and improve government accountability and policy development. And so it's very welcome that the Malaysian government's chosen to continue those arrangements. I haven't participated in all of the sessions here, but I know that there's also been a lot of very good suggestions for further reforms that Malaysia could consider, including around shadow cabinets, freedom of information laws, and other initiatives. And I think one of the really key observations that has been made through the roundtable has been around the importance of strong institutions and mechanisms and respect for such institutions, and especially to ensure the continuation of good governance when you have coalition government and during a hung parliament. I'd like to say that in my short time in Malaysia, I've only been here coming up to a couple of years. I have been very impressed, particularly by GE15 last year, the way Malaysia managed its transition of power when there was a hung parliament, and the ability to form government after just 5 days from a diverse parliament was in fact, I think, a very remarkable achievement and something that should be acknowledged. I think the last time, and my colleague Chris would know this, the last time Australia had a hung parliament, I think in 2010, I think it took us considerably longer than 5 days to form a government at that time. And there are many other countries it takes much, much longer as well. And so I do think that that reflects well on the respect that Malaysia and its parliament has for your institutions and rule of law. I know that there's other further reforms that are being talked about that can further stability, but I think that indicates a strong willingness from your political leadership to stabilise the system to support good governance. Finally, for Australia, we're a like-minded, multicultural, multi-faith parliamentary democracy like Malaysia, and so we really do look forward to continue working with you all, with Malaysia and other international partners on these issues. We're looking forward to growing our parliamentary engagement with Malaysia, including by increasing our parliamentary exchange programs and sharing experiences as we've done here through this roundtable. Like you, we're invested in learning from each other to strengthen democracy in our countries and globally, and to improve governance for the benefit of all of our citizens, which is really what it's all about. So once again, I congratulate you all on making this roundtable happen and such a success. I think it's truly a productive and great display of everyone's commitment to working together on further parliamentary reform and strengthening. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Justili. Ms. Corinne?
Thank you. I think it's my role to sort of summarize some of the insights of our discussions over the last 2 days, and it's difficult because a lot of very interesting things were said. Don't worry, I have an incentive, a very good incentive to keep this brief because I have a plane to catch, so I will keep it brief. And my other difficulty is that sometimes I have difficulties, like one of our speakers, to read my own notes, but I'll try my best. One of the main insights that I took from the discussions was actually something that I think it was the deputy speaker said on the very first day, on the very first morning, is that you do not have to choose between democracy and stability, and that in fact they are inseparable. And I think if we had to summarize the whole discussion, that would be a good slogan to keep. But I think also what the last 2 days have shown is that democracy takes hard work. There is a saying that, that a newborn democracy or recently born democracy does not mature overnight. There's a saying that it takes a village to raise a child, and I would say that it takes the whole country to raise a democracy. But especially it takes politicians who are ready not only to apply the law of democracy, but to apply the spirit of democracy and to grow this democratic culture that many speakers have referred to. And conversely, we were reminded on the first day by Professor Hofmeister that the greatest threat to democracy is the willingness of leaders, of some leaders, to break the norms that sustain democracy. But we also heard lots of very practical, concrete examples of measures, mechanisms, practices that can help build democracy. We heard about the constructive vote of no confidence that helped stabilize Germany after the war. We also heard from Canada and Australia how properly resourced shadow cabinets can help strengthen the quality of legislation and can help build bridges across the aisle between the ruling and opposition parties. We heard how strong institutions and a strong civil service, such as the one it was mentioned in Taiwan, can contribute to stability and can mean that parties can take more time. The ambassador just said it was remarkable that Malaysia took only five days to form the coalition government after the elections. But sometimes it takes more time, and sometimes it's okay because the governance functions continue, and because the solid civil service and solid institutions continue functioning no matter what. So, and sometimes it's very important to negotiate a solid, detailed coalition agreement. We heard the very interesting example of Finland, which has seen a reduction in the size of the main established political parties, or a fragmentation of political parties over the last decades. But that has not led to instability. Rather, it has led to a willingness of the ruling parties, a bigger willingness of the ruling parties to compromise because their majority is thinner. We also learned that in Finland, opposition MPs have a lot of influence on legislation through various mechanisms, including through the opportunity to raise initiatives, even though they, like private members' bill in Malaysia, they often fail, but still the opposition MPs feel engaged and involved in the legislation. We also heard that even more important maybe than all these mechanisms and practices that were discussed is this, and Maha, I think, put it this way, is the common system of beliefs that ties the members of Parliament. And I think I really liked Markku's 4 C's that describe the common system of beliefs in Finland: cooperation, compromise, coalition, and consensus. And I really liked also the value he put on patience. So both Gisela and Markku spoke of the importance of trust among parties who are building a coalition, but also the trust across the aisle between the opposition and the ruling party. And the opposition has to trust that one day their day in the sun will come. So they have to trust the institution and the system. The trust among parties building a coalition is not easy to build, and Gisela reminded us that it shouldn't mean naivety, that it's all a bargain. So but that's any negotiation in life. We heard this afternoon from Marlon, still speaking about trust, that we learned how to build trust across the echo chambers that social media generate. And how to fight polarization. Very interesting examples from the Philippines and the work that has been done there. We heard how not to mistake youth skepticism of traditional political systems and the traditional political parties, not to mistake that for youth apathy. And we learned also of social media's power, but also limitations in mobilizing voters and shaping behaviors. And what was very interesting was that all our Malaysian speakers put all these experiences, but brought them in the context of Malaysian politics, which of course was the whole purpose of this roundtable. We've learned, it was really interesting to learn from them both the remarkable achievements of Malaysia over the last few years and what they saw as still the shortcomings in its progress towards full democracy, if there is such a thing as full democracy. Among the achievements, I noted the lowering of the voting age and the incredible rate of youth participation in the vote, because 79% is really a rate that many, many countries would envy Malaysia. We heard about the significant jump in the rating for press freedom. That's really significant achievement. The abolition of mandatory death penalty. We've heard about the anti-hopping law. It was really fascinating to me to hear about the whole process and how it nearly never saw the light of day, but it did. We heard about also maybe a growing awareness among members of parliament about the intricacy of the legislative and complexity of the legislative process. At the same time, many speakers advocated for more reforms. Some advocated for a strong electoral court, for different funding of political parties, for term limits, for certainly standing order reforms, we heard a lot about the better resourcing, institutionalization, and expansion of select committees. So all these will be difficult, but they're actually, it's just legislation, so it can be done. And I think what will be harder maybe is sort of the ethical issues that were raised, some very important ones, like the real difficulty of maintaining one's party identity and values while engaging in the necessary compromises required in building a coalition. That's a hard one. Also very, very difficult is really building this sort of citizens' engagement in political life, addressing some of the traditional beliefs. And it was this afternoon there was mention of this sort of savior's worship. People always want a strong man who's going to save the day. So these are tougher, longer term issues, but I see a lot of willingness to work towards them. I think you will all agree that it was a very rich, but at the same time lucid and hopeful conversation. And it doesn't stop here, and Thomas will speak of the next steps now. It's just left for me to thank you all, to thank, of course, again, our supporters, the EU, Canada, and Australia, for their support, the speaker, of course, for his hospitality, the deputy speaker for being with us, all the experts who traveled a long way to be here with us and share candidly their experiences in their countries, our panelists who did not shy away from difficult conversations, and our co-organizers, of course, Bercy and Global Bercy, and all of you for being with us these 2 days. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Corinne. What an excellent summation of the 2 days, really. And I think it really helped us in our report writing that we'll be doing. To just list down everything, just pass the notes to us. We will try to decipher it. But what you say was excellent. So going forward, I was just thinking just now, what should I say about this roundtable? It's to me really a gathering of allies. Allies who are committed to seeing a better and democracy for Malaysia. Maybe some of us felt kind of like a little bit discouraged that we didn't see more members of parliament or senators or ministers in our midst in these 2 days, but they were here. I just want to thank them and acknowledge that a number, whether they registered or not, they did turn up and be with us. Maybe not in every session, but they were here. And yes, and let me tell you about the advocacy that Bersih does over here, It is about identifying allies. And this is what we have done over the last few years. We identified members of parliament from any party who shares the same commitment and values and passion, and they are there. Identify them and work closely with them to push the reforms that we believe will be good for democracy in Malaysia. And over the last few years, you know, we have made some strong allies and friendship with some of this, and they are the ones who are here, who were here, who were on the panel with us. And this is how we see things change, you know. And the other ally, really, I want to acknowledge, especially in this last session, are the media. The media. Thank you. You know, Melissa, different ones, Sharat and Sina, the last few years, what an amazing partnership we have had. You know, we just to take one advocacy, the anti-hopping law, you know, which we, right after the Sheraton move, realized that that is the one reform, one law that we need to nail before GE 15. And we started the conversation. I can tell you it was hard. Not many politicians were really interested on both sides, because they were more interested in the potential of just getting people to jump back and forth and form government. But you know, we persevered, and we rope in, like I say, allies from different parties. We rope in the media. And at the end, you heard how the law minister said, it was actually almost dead in the water. The cabinet rejected it in April of last year. Almost wholeheartedly, they rejected it. But they did not dare to announce it. Because why? There was already public pressure built up by us and the media, you know. They didn't dare to tell the public we are not going to have the anti-hopping law. So they came, they was, we knew a bit of the backstory, you know. April 11 in the Parliament, they called for a special session to pass the anti-hopping law, but then they realized that the amendment to the Constitution was so poor. I'm just quoting 1 Junaidi, you know. Yeah. It was so bad that it should not be passed, but they cannot cancel it. So in the end, last minute, literally before the sitting began, they decided that it will go to the select committee, where they would seriously, from all parties, sit down and find a solution that is acceptable to all. And then we have the anti-hopping law, tabled again in July and passed unanimously against their own self-interest. And it is because of the partnership that we have with our allies, all of you here. That's how we do it. And I want to say, this message that we are bringing in this roundtable, how to make coalition government and hung parliament work, this is the big question that need to be answered, and we have some ideas. Thank you so much, all the experts who came. Thank you so much. Now, we are getting some ideas now, and this is just an event. Change is a process. Election is just an event. But you want to see long-term change, it's a long-term process. From this roundtable, what we're going to do is that we are going to, first of all, produce a substantial report. I told Corinne and Nimala and my team that looking at the last roundtable, we had a report. It was okay, but it was just a very, you know, small report. But this time, I want a report that captures the essence and everything of what we said, so that we can put it in the hand of the lawmakers who are not here, and continue the conversation in different platforms, in different channels, one-to-one, in small group, closed-door meeting, whatever suits them, we will continue that, because we really need to find a solution to how we can make this thing work and work very well for us in this country. That's what we're going to do, you know. So thank you for the support from the different foreign embassies and High Commission that allow us to produce all this, hosting this, and also produce the report, and also ongoing engagement. But again, I come back to our allies. We will go back to our allies who are here. We will ask the media who are here and who are listening live on YouTube, if you believe this is important, if you think that the solution that are being put forth, that we are not telling you must have this, we are saying you need to have some legal mechanism so that multi-party democracy can flourish in Malaysia. Then you help us amplify the voice, you know, the suggestion, so that it comes to a point that, again, they cannot say no, but to amend laws and reforms that will make our democracy deeper. It's about partnership that makes things work. It's never the work of one organization or one person. Never. We build upon the work of those who have gone before us. We build on their work, their labor, their sacrifice. And we do it so that we can pass it on to the next generation, the young people, the youth. You heard some of them. Don't they give us hope? Don't they give us hope? Definitely. I'm hopeful, you know, for this nation because of young people that we have who spoke up. So, moving forward, let's do this. You know, this is just the beginning. Let us, from here, strategize. Let us from here think about other important conversations that we need to raise for this nation, and let's support each other. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So this is the end of the roundtable. We will be, as you say, preparing the report. We are looking at about a 2 months time frame to put it together. Then, but in the meantime, before that, we probably will have a series of videos and short videos that captures some of the comments made, so that we will keep this conversation alive. And we want to thank the team that worked behind the scenes, the video crew from the 4th. We want to thank the Monash volunteers who came and just make sure we know where we are sitting, where we are going, where's the toilet, and all these things. And, you know, Global Brussels, who really brought us together, and in the last minute brought in some of the experts who are here. Kofi Annan, who, you know, really their statesmanship and passion for this area of democracy so encourage and inspire us to do this thing. But really, I want us to give a big shout out to my team, the Secretariat, you know, headed by Kokhin over there, Salami, Dorina, and an intern, Ravina, and last but not least, in the Secretariat, we have Astro, who really was our senior program officer. At the last minute, his son got very ill and he had to fly home to Sabah, and we say, family come first. You don't worry. Yeah. And and so the Bersih team, I know how hard they work. I just saw the emails and WhatsApp going back and forth, and my stress level just went through the roof, you know, but they held it together and came through for us. Thank you so much, team, you know. But, you know, there's another team working behind the scene, that is the Parlimen team. The video crew, the supporting staff. You know, we have some technical issues today, but, you know, they never stop trying to find a solution to resolve it. It's beyond their control, but I want to really appreciate them for getting the live streaming back online, even on their phone hotspot. Can you believe the proceeding for a moment continued because someone used their own phone hotspot to live stream, you know? So thank you, that's commitment for you. But they resolved it. So thank you for the excellent work, and the speakers of Parliament's office staff who really kind of like run this thing with us. They took care of many of the invitation to MPs and senators, the registrations and different things. So it is, like I say, it's a team effort. Nothing happens because of one person, but because we all put our hand together. So give yourself a big hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. I think you have speak everything I want to say. So that's the end of the 2 days roundtable. Big thank you to everyone. Stay put if you want to take pictures with the banner, but don't forget to hashtag My Democracy. Group photo. Shall we take another group photo? Like what we did on the first day? Yeah? Okay. Maybe everyone just, move to that side and fill up the space in front, I think. By the way, tea are served as well in the next building, so if you have time, you can stay put and lembang sikit lah. I think we can. Maybe we can. Come forward. Yeah, all of you come forward around here.